The two young lieutenants snickered at the woman's faded military jacket, making jokes about surplus store veterans and wannabe soldiers. But when General Harris spotted the nearly invisible patch on Miranda Reeves's sleeve, his face went white. Some insignia carry secrets that can silence an entire room. The Fort Braxton commissary buzzed with the familiar sounds of military life shopping carts rolling across polished floors, the beep of scanners, and the casual conversations of service members and their families going about their daily routines. The large store served the sprawling military installation, providing everything from groceries to household goods for the thousands of personnel stationed at one of the Army's most important bases. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the commissary was moderately busy, with the usual mix of active-duty soldiers, retirees, and military families taking advantage of their base privileges to shop for necessities. Miranda Reeves moved through the commissary aisles with the quiet efficiency of someone who preferred to complete her errands quickly and without drawing attention. At 55, she carried herself with a bearing that suggested military training, though the years had softened the rigid posture that had once defined her service. Her most distinctive feature was the faded military jacket. She wore olive-drab canvas that had seen better decades, with fabric worn thin at the elbows and edges frayed from years of wear. To casual observers, it looked like surplus store clothing, the kind of military-style jacket that civilians often bought for its durability and utilitarian appearance. But Miranda's jacket was authentic, earned through service that few people would ever know about or understand. The patches and insignia that had once adorned it were mostly gone, now removed for security reasons that had become second nature during her years of classified work. Only one patch remained so faded and worn that it was barely visible, a small unit insignia that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who knew its significance. Miranda shopped with the methodical approach of someone living on a fixed income, comparing prices and checking her list twice before making purchases. Second Lieutenant Jake Morrison and First Lieutenant Sarah Chin were browsing the commissary during their lunch break, their conversation loud enough to carry across the aisles as they discussed their upcoming training exercises and weekend plans. Both were recent graduates of their respective service academies, full of the confidence and swagger that came with new commissions and the belief that their education had prepared them for anything the military could throw at them. They represented the new generation of officers, well-educated, technologically savvy, and eager to prove themselves in an increasingly complex military environment, where traditional warfare was giving way to cyber threats and asymmetric conflicts. As Miranda reached for a box of cereal on a high shelf, her movement caused her jacket to shift, making the faded fabric and worn patches more visible to the two young officers who happened to be shopping in the same aisle. "Check out the fashion statement," Lieutenant Morrison said to his companion, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who had never learned to consider the feelings of others. "Looks like someone's been shopping at the surplus store again." Lieutenant Chen laughed, joining in the mockery without considering the implications of their words. "I love how these wannabe veterans think wearing old military gear makes them look authentic. Probably bought that jacket at a thrift store and thinks it makes her look tough." Miranda heard every word, but continued her shopping without reaction, her face maintaining the neutral expression that had served her well during years of classified operations, where showing emotion could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. I bet she's never even been in the military. Morrison continued, emboldened by his companion's laughter. Just another civilian trying to cash in on military respect without earning it. The two lieutenants seemed to find Miranda's silence encouraging, rather than deterring, interpreting her lack of response as validation of their assumptions about her background and authenticity. "You know what really gets me," Chen said, her voice growing louder as she warmed to the subject. "These people wear our uniform like it's some kind of costume. They have no idea what real military service means." Morrison nodded in agreement, his academy training having filled him with theoretical knowledge about military tradition, but little understanding of the reality that many veterans faced after leaving service. Exactly. Real veterans don't need to advertise their service with old jackets and fake patches. They carry themselves with dignity. The irony of their comments was lost on both young officers who failed to recognize that Miranda was demonstrating exactly the kind of dignity they claimed to value. Her refusal to engage with their mockery, her quiet composure in the face of their disrespect, and her obvious comfort in the military environment all suggested someone with genuine service experience. But their youth and inexperience blinded them to these subtle indicators, leaving them to judge based on superficial appearances rather than deeper understanding. As Miranda moved to the checkout line, the two lieutenants followed, apparently finding her presence a source of continued entertainment. Their comments grew bolder as they convinced themselves that their assessment of her was correct. "I wonder if she knows that impersonating military personnel is actually illegal," Morrison said, his voice carrying the self-righteous tone of someone who believed he was performing a public service. "Maybe we should ask to see her military ID." Chen's response revealed the depth of their misunderstanding about military culture and the respect owed to all veterans regardless of their appearance or circumstances. "She probably has some fake ID from the internet. These stolen valor cases are everywhere now." Miranda reached the checkout counter and began placing her items on the conveyor belt with the same methodical precision she had used throughout her shopping trip. The cashier, a middle-aged woman who had worked at the commissary for years, recognized Miranda as a regular customer and greeted her with the friendly familiarity of someone who had seen her shop there many times before. "How are you today, Mrs. Reeves?" the cashier asked, her tone carrying genuine warmth and respect that contrasted sharply with the treatment Miranda was receiving from the two officers behind her in line. The cashier's friendly greeting revealed Miranda's name to the two lieutenants, but it also demonstrated something they had failed to notice: the respect and familiarity that came from regular interaction with someone who belonged in the military community. "I'm doing well, thank you, Carol," Miranda replied, her voice carrying the quiet courtesy that had characterized her throughout the encounter with the mocking officers. "How's your son doing at his new assignment?" The conversation between Miranda and Carol revealed a depth of connection to the military community that went far beyond what a civilian impersonator would possess. Carol's son was stationed overseas, and Miranda asked about him with the genuine concern of someone who understood the challenges and dangers of military service. "He's doing well in Germany," Carol replied. "Thanks for asking. You know how it is, we worry about them, no matter how old they get." Miranda nodded with understanding. "I do know. Please give him my regards when you speak with him." The exchange was brief but meaningful, demonstrating the kind of authentic military-community connection that the two lieutenants had failed to recognize. Their assumptions about Miranda being a civilian impersonator were being quietly undermined by evidence they were too prejudiced to see. As Miranda finished her transaction and prepared to leave the commissary, the automatic doors opened to admit a figure whose presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the store. General Robert Harris, a three-star general with over 30 years of service, entered with the bearing and authority that marked him as one of the installation's most senior officers. General Harris was known throughout Fort Braxton as a soldier's general, someone who had risen through the ranks based on merit and combat experience rather than political connections. His chest was decorated with ribbons that told the story of a career spent in the world's most dangerous places, and his reputation for taking care of his soldiers was legendary. As he moved through the commissary, soldiers and civilians alike showed him the respect his rank and service had earned. But it was his reaction to seeing Miranda that would transform the entire situation. The general's eyes swept across the store, taking in the usual scene of military families going about their daily business. But when his gaze fell on Miranda, his expression changed dramatically. His eyes fixed on the barely visible patch on her jacket, and his face went pale with recognition. General Harris stopped in his tracks, his experienced eye immediately identifying the faded unit insignia that the two lieutenants had dismissed as meaningless decoration. The patch was so worn that most people would overlook it entirely, but to someone with Harris's background and security clearance, it was unmistakable. "Jesus Christ!" He whispered under his breath, the words barely audible, but carrying the weight of sudden understanding and profound respect. The patch belonged to Spectre Group, one of the military's most classified special operations units. The insignia was deliberately designed to be nearly invisible, worn only by operators whose missions were so sensitive that even acknowledging their existence could compromise national security. Harris had encountered Spectre Group operatives during his own career, but he had never expected to see one shopping in a commissary wearing their unit patch like a faded memory of service that could never be publicly acknowledged. The general's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Despite the informal setting and the presence of other shoppers, he came to attention and rendered a crisp salute to Miranda, his action sending shockwaves through everyone who witnessed it. The sight of a three-star general saluting a woman in a faded jacket created an instant moment of stunned silence throughout the commissary. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, shopping carts came to a halt, and every eye turned toward the extraordinary scene unfolding near the checkout counters. The two lieutenants, who had been mocking Miranda, felt their blood run cold as they realized they had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The woman they had dismissed as a civilian impersonator was being honored by one of the Army's most senior generals, and their cruel comments suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but potentially career-ending. Other shoppers in the commissary began to understand that they were witnessing something significant, even if they didn't fully comprehend the details. The respect being shown by General Harris suggested that Miranda was someone of considerable importance, and the contrast between the general's reverence and the lieutenant's mockery was stark and uncomfortable. Carol, the cashier who had been friendly with Miranda, watched with growing understanding as pieces of a puzzle began to fall into place. The quiet customer she had served for months was clearly someone with a distinguished military background that she had never suspected. The atmosphere in the commissary had shifted from casual routine to something approaching reverence as people began to realize they were in the presence of someone whose service had earned the respect of the installation's commanding general. General Harris maintained his salute for a full 10 seconds before speaking, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent commissary. "Spectre Group Operation Thrawn 03. He said the words, hitting Miranda like a physical blow as memories she had tried to bury came flooding back. The operation name meant nothing to most of the people present, but to Miranda it represented the defining moment of her military career, a classified extraction mission in hostile territory that had saved 32 lives, including that of a young captain named Robert Harris. "You saved my life in Kandahar," the general continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You and your team extracted my unit when we were surrounded and outgunned. I never got the chance to thank you properly because your operation was classified above my clearance level." The revelation sent shock waves through the commissary as people began to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The woman who had been mocked for her old jacket was being recognized as a war hero by one of the Army's most senior officers. Miranda's composure finally cracked slightly as she was forced to confront memories she had spent years trying to suppress. The mission Harris was referring to had cost her team dearly. 2 operators had died during the extraction, and Miranda herself had been wounded in the firefight that followed. "General," she said quietly, "I was just doing my job." The 2 young officers who had been mocking Miranda found themselves at the center of a nightmare scenario that would haunt their careers for years to come. They had publicly ridiculed a decorated Special Operations veteran in front of witnesses, including the installation's commanding general. Lieutenant Morrison felt his stomach drop as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The woman he had accused of stolen valor was being honored by a 3-star general for classified operations that had saved American lives. His cruel comments about her jacket and her authenticity now seemed not just inappropriate, but criminally ignorant. Lieutenant Chen's face had gone pale as she understood that her military career might be over before it had truly begun. The academy training that had filled her with confidence had not prepared her for this moment of moral reckoning, where her prejudices and assumptions were being exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Sir Morrison stammered, trying to salvage something from the disaster. "We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out." General Harris interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of cold fury that made seasoned soldiers tremble. "You saw a veteran in civilian clothes and decided she was fair game for your mockery. You violated every principle of military courtesy and respect that should have been drilled into you at the academy." The general's condemnation of the 2 lieutenants was witnessed by dozens of people, including other officers, enlisted personnel, and military families, who would spread the story throughout the installation within hours. The young officers had not just made a mistake, they had made it in the most public way possible, in front of witnesses who would ensure that their failure became legendary. "This woman," General Harris continued, gesturing toward Miranda, "served in operations so classified that I can't discuss them in public. She risked her life to save American soldiers and she did it without recognition or reward because the nature of her service required secrecy. The general's words painted a picture of sacrifice and service that made the lieutenant's mockery seem even more cruel and ignorant. They had attacked someone whose contributions to national security far exceeded their own, despite their academy educations and new commissions. "You too will report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning," Harris ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going to have a very long conversation about military values, respect for veterans, and what it means to wear the uniform." The public nature of their humiliation was perhaps the most devastating aspect of the entire incident. Military installations were small communities where news traveled fast, and the story of two lieutenants mocking a special operations veteran would become part of base folklore within days. Their reputations were damaged beyond repair, and their careers would be forever marked by this moment of moral failure. General Harris's recognition of Miranda had opened a door that had been sealed by classification levels and national security concerns for over a decade. With his authority and security clearance, he was able to provide context for Miranda's service that she had never been allowed to discuss publicly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general announced to the assembled crowd in the commissary, "you are in the presence of one of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. Miranda Reeves served with Spectre Group, conducting operations that saved countless American lives in some of the most dangerous places on earth." The general's words carried the weight of absolute authority, transforming Miranda from a target of mockery into a recognized hero in the span of minutes. The people who had witnessed the lieutenant's cruel comments now understood that they had been watching the humiliation of someone whose service record far exceeded that of her tormentors. Her team's actions during Operation Throne 03 alone saved 32 American soldiers, including myself, Harris continued. She was wounded during the extraction and continued to fight until every American was safely evacuated. Her service was so classified that she couldn't even receive proper recognition for her sacrifice. General Harris made a decision that would change Miranda's life forever. Using his authority and connections within the Pentagon, he initiated the process of declassifying enough of Miranda's service record to allow her to receive the recognition and benefits she had been denied for years. "I'm going to make some calls," he told Miranda privately after the public recognition. "Your service record needs to be partially declassified so you can receive the medical benefits and recognition you've earned. The secrecy that protected national security has been protecting bureaucratic failures that left you without support." The general's intervention would cut through years of red tape and bureaucratic obstacles that had prevented Miranda from accessing the VA benefits she needed for service-connected injuries and medical conditions. Her classified service had made it impossible to prove her eligibility for programs designed to help veterans, creating a cruel irony where her most distinguished service had become a barrier to receiving care. The two lieutenants who had mocked Miranda approached her with obvious shame and terror, understanding that their careers hung in the balance based on how they handled this moment of reckoning. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Morrison said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I owe you the most profound apology possible. My behavior was inexcusable, and I'm ashamed to wear the same uniform that you honored with your service." Lieutenant Chen's apology was equally heartfelt and desperate. "Mrs. Reeves, I have no excuse for my actions. I disrespected a war hero and violated every principle of military courtesy. I'm deeply sorry and will spend the rest of my career trying to make amends for this failure." Miranda's response was characteristically gracious, demonstrating the kind of character that had made her an effective special operations soldier. "Lieutenants, you made a mistake based on assumptions. Learn from it and become better officers. That's all any of us can do." Word of the incident spread throughout Fort Braxton with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Within hours, the story of the two lieutenants who had mocked a special operations veteran was being discussed in barracks offices and family quarters across the installation. The reaction was uniformly negative toward the lieutenants and supportive of Miranda. Veterans who had struggled with their own transitions to civilian life saw her story as representative of the challenges faced by those whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. "This is exactly what's wrong with some of these new officers," said Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who had heard about the incident from his wife who worked at the commissary. "They think their education makes them better than the people who actually fought the wars." The story also highlighted broader issues about how veterans were treated in civilian settings and the assumptions people made based on appearance rather than character. Miranda's faded jacket, which had been the target of mockery, was now understood as a symbol of authentic service rather than pretense. General Harris used the incident as a catalyst for changes in officer training programs throughout the Army. The story of Miranda's humiliation and subsequent recognition became a mandatory case study in military leadership courses designed to teach young officers about respect assumptions and the importance of understanding military history and culture. "This incident demonstrates everything wrong with how we're training our junior officers," Harris told a gathering of military educators. "We're producing technically competent soldiers who lack the wisdom and humility that come from understanding the sacrifices of those who served before them." The case study included video testimonials from Miranda about her service and the challenges faced by veterans whose contributions couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Her story became a powerful teaching tool about the complexity of military service and the importance of treating all veterans with respect and dignity. For Miranda, the recognition from General Harris marked a turning point in her post-military life. The declassification of portions of her service record allowed her to access VA benefits that had been denied for years, providing medical care for injuries sustained during classified operations. More importantly, the public acknowledgement of her service gave her a sense of validation that she had been missing since leaving the military. For the first time in years, she could speak about her experiences and contribute to the training of future soldiers. "I spent so many years in silence," Miranda told a group of officer candidates during one of her speaking engagements. "Not because I was ashamed of my service, but because the nature of that service required secrecy. Now, I can finally share what I learned and help others understand what military service really means." The faded jacket that had been mocked became a symbol of authentic service, and Miranda wore it with pride as she spoke to military audiences about sacrifice service and the importance of respecting all veterans. The two lieutenants who had mocked Miranda faced severe consequences for their actions, though General Harris's intervention ultimately saved their careers while ensuring they learned from their mistakes. Both officers were required to complete extensive additional training on military history, veteran affairs, and leadership ethics. Lieutenant Morrison was assigned to work with Veteran Support Services for 6 months, where he gained firsthand understanding of the challenges faced by former service members transitioning to civilian life. The experience transformed his perspective on military service and the respect owed to all veterans. Lieutenant Chen was required to research and present a comprehensive report on classified military operations and their impact on the soldiers who conducted them. Her research opened her eyes to the sacrifices made by special operations personnel whose service could never be fully acknowledged. Both officers eventually became advocates for veteran rights and respect, using their own failure as a teaching tool to help other young military personnel avoid similar mistakes. The incident at Fort Braxton sparked changes throughout the military education system, with Miranda's story becoming a cornerstone of character development programs for new officers. Military academies incorporated her experience into their curricula, emphasizing the importance of humility, respect, and understanding military heritage. The Army also implemented new policies regarding the treatment of veterans with classified service records, creating pathways for recognition and benefits that had previously been blocked by security concerns. Miranda's case became a model for how the military could honor its most secretive heroes while maintaining necessary security protocols. Veterans organizations used Miranda's story to advocate for better support systems for former special operations personnel, many of whom faced similar challenges in accessing benefits and recognition for their classified service. Her experience highlighted the need for specialized programs that could address the unique needs of veterans whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Miranda Reeves became a respected voice in military and veteran communities, speaking at academies, training centers, and veteran gatherings about the importance of service sacrifice and respect. Her faded jacket, once a target of mockery, became a symbol of authentic military service and the hidden sacrifices made by special operations personnel. The patch that General Harris had recognized was eventually replaced with a new one specially designed to honor Spectre Group veterans whose service could finally be acknowledged. Miranda wore it with pride, knowing that her story had helped other classified veterans receive the recognition and support they deserved. Her legacy was not just her classified service, but her role in changing how the military community understood and honored the sacrifices of its most secretive heroes.